They were moved from around Little Rock, somewhere down in there, on down the Red River in Louisiana. Some reason they came back up to Little Rock. They fled to remain there, but they didn't allow them to. They had moved them on up here. Probably in the 1500s. Some evidence that came out the east, down the Ohio River. At one time, it was believed that they were associated with the Osages, the Omahas, the Kaws. They came down the Mississippi River, known as the downstream people.
T-O-T in the olden times.
I'm going to even place us before we were in Arkansas, and I'm going to place us at Cahokia. And I don't know if you know where Cahokia is located. It's outside of St. Louis, Missouri. It has the largest mound in the United States, called Monk's Mound. The circumference at the base of Monk's Mound is actually bigger than the circumference of the base of the Giza Pyramid in Egypt. There was more people in Cahokia than there were living in London, England at the time. At the same time, it was a huge city. That is the society from which we migrated from.
I remember one of the earliest stories my dad used to tell me was basically the story about how we became the downstream people.
One time, we're part of the Ogahpah Sioux branch, and so at one time there were multiple tribes.
We were part of a bigger tribe that split up into different tribes.
The whole notion of the Ogahpah, the Ponca, Kaw, Osage, Omaha, and Quapaw being together before that.
It was spring.
We came upon a river.
We got to the Mississippi.
And it was a flooding time.
They came to a river and it was overflowing, and they wanted to get across.
Trying to get across the Mississippi.
They got groups of people to weave ropes out of grapevines, that kind of thing.
And so they threw a rope across.
Then they built their little baskets, their burrow baskets, but they're baskets that they would sit inside of and pull themselves across. Some of them made it to the other side of the river. And the people that made it across went upstream, and they're the upstream people, and they're known as the Omaha.
The Omaha went north.
The rafts that were being used, or the canoes that were tied together, those ties, those ropes broke.
The vines broke. We kind of shifted downstream.
And so we become the downstream people.
The people that stayed on the side of the bank are the children of the middle waters, and they're the Wajaji. You know them as Osage.
So we kind of were a product of an accident.
So they kept moving south down through Ohio and the river and so forth, and settled around Pine Bluff.
It was supposed to be some of the most fertile land on this part of the continent.
So we brought our pottery skills, making skills from there, and we brought the mound building skills from there. And when we were washed downstream, we tried to recreate that.
We were farmers and gatherers, so we were able to gain our resources through farming and gathering.
They grew corn. The historians talk about how many miles of cornfields that they came across when they first came into contact with us.
Good thing we were able to make friends with one of those other people, the French. They were actually pretty good to us.
And they lived there for many years.
1800s, we faced assimilation and eradication, I suppose.
Being in southeast Arkansas, they decided, the leaders at that time, that yes, we should enter into treaties.
In 1818, when we ceded 30 million acres of our ancestral homeland, all of Arkansas, parts of Louisiana, Missouri, and Oklahoma.
Each treaty basically was an agreement, and then it was kind of changed and adapted to the party that it fit best.
People of European descent wanted that rich farmland. It was only 6 years later that we lost all of our land, those remaining 2 acres. So that was in 1824.
Treaties were supposed to be a friendship between the government and the people of the Quapaw, which turned out to be the start of the worst times of our people's history.
At that point, it took them a few years, but they marched the Quapaw down to the Red River onto Caddo land. And unfortunately, by that point, there was really only about a third of the tribe left. So, European contact was in or around 1673. And so we lost 2/3 of the tribe simply due to exposure to other forces, primarily disease.
We had our own Trail of Tears.
Most other tribal nations across the country got our land stole from us.
And through 3 different bouts of smallpox over the course of 100 years, it decimated the tribe.
From what I recollect in that last treaty is what pushed us all the way over here, from getting pushed around through Arkansas, through Caddo country, through southern Oklahoma, going back. But that last one is what pushed us up to this big chunk of land in northeastern, now Oklahoma.
We lost many members as they made the movement to Indian territory.
When we got to Oklahoma, we were less than 200.
I think our hardships are, of what the government has put on us. Of course, the treaties broken and things like that.
When the Indian came, this land was no good. But beneath our feet was fuel for the Wajini Nika bullet.
My name is Ed Kahili. I was raised in Pitcher, and I had always wanted to return to the area back here for some reason. I don't know what the draw was, but I had such pleasant memories of growing up in Pitcher, in the mining field.
I have incumbency papers here, original ones. I have leases. I have laws. I have amounts of money that were paid. Originally, when the 1890 roll was made, and the tribe elected to have each individual on the roll allotted instead of the tribe getting everything allotted to them. My grandmother was just 3 years old, but she was still allotted 240 acres, each individual was, as I understand it, and my great-grandfather. So most of their allotments were in the Pitcher-Carden area.
Mining began over in Peoria in 1891. That was the first discovery of lead, and at that time, Peoria is right on the border of the Quapaw Reservation, and so some of that mining spilled over on the southern edge of the Quapaw Reservation. The next major discovery was on the Quapaw Reservation on South 640 Road on the Abner Abrams land. He was drilling a well for his farm and happened to hit some rich zinc ore. That was really the beginning of the mining era with that one single discovery, because that brought in other people who began to drill in other locations, and lo and behold, they found that it was within 90 feet of the surface and easily recoverable. And so from that point on, drilling began to take place. It was spreading primarily westward, and they ultimately drilled in excess of 100,000 drill holes. And that was really the heart of the mining field around what later became Pitcher and Carden.
My grandmother told me different things. Zinkville used to be quite a big little town. When they'd go down there, she said sometimes if it had rain or whatever, that they'd get out and there would be a reddish-like seepage coming up out of the ground, and that must have been the minerals.
But the land that my great-grandfather had and my grandmother were adjoined in one area. But there were 5 mines altogether that he and she had.
I heard more from my husband, Charlie. He worked in the mines when he was 14. I had a picture of him, and he is on the wagon cart taking and hauling underground, and the mules were pulling. And he'd tell me how sorry he felt for these animals, because after they worked them so long, they'd take them out of the mines and they would be blind.
Along the way, there were some Quapaws who benefited tremendously, because of the rich finds, if you will, on their land, and there were many others who had hoped to find it on their land, but it didn't work out that way. They're just dry holes, and so there was nothing there.
Most of them had been leased, because they couldn't sell their mines until the year 24.
Of course, they had thousands and thousands of people there at one time when the mines were going strong.
It lasted from the early 1900s until October of 1970. So it was quite a mining era. Ore that was discovered on the Quapaws became an issue of management because some of the Quapaws were not sufficiently educated to be able to understand all the financial and legal transactions and that sort of thing. And so they were having difficulty managing their allotments and the mines on their allotments. And that sort of threw the door open to graft and theft and false leases and convincing some of the Quapaws to sign leases under terms that under normal circumstances they would never have signed.
Our relationship with the government has not always been that good.
Dad was Indian. He was actually half Quapaw and half Miami. However, way back when, in order for his parents to sell any land, they had to claim that they were 3/4 degree Indian blood each.
But they didn't get to live on their land.
And they were deemed incompetent.
The Bureau of Indian Affairs had an office, and they were to help the Native peoples with dealing with all kinds of things, but a lot of it had to do with land.
The BIA was in on it too. That's been 100 years ago, probably. Some of them were guilty, not all of them in the BIA, but they were taking kickbacks.
Later years, our people felt they weren't doing us right. Collecting rents, royalties, getting all these leases and things. Some of them were good, but then there were some that were not.
The last meeting that we had, which was probably 10 years ago, about Chat, our family did have a sale to a company in Pitcher there that was at Flint Rock, and they still owe us over $20,000. They went bankrupt, and the BIA has no enforcement department, or they say they don't. So when Carden shut down and EPA bought out the people in Carden, the town lots, some of those people were paying $25 a year for their lease on their land that their house was on, or their trailer. And they were supposed to have to pay up everything that they still owed on those town lots when they got their buyout. But most of them did not, because the EPA or the Bureau of Indian Affairs did not make them.
Now, Uncle Abe had 9 mines that were being leased out and 2 tailing piles. And these mining companies would come in from Commerce and around this area and lease them.
Mining companies were coming in from all over the world, basically, once the rich strikes took place here. And they were not ethical under any set of circumstances, at least by our standards today. So they were interested in gaining as much land as they could for as low a price as they could.
Of course, it was a big, wide area, but it went all through the land like a snake, and then it went down another 100 feet, and then it went down another 100 feet. I don't really know what holds the grass up.
And my poor grandmother, a non-Indian, leased her allotment.
Then people would move mining equipment on their land without permission. They thought, well, they're just a Quapaw Indian.
He was a veterinarian, and he wanted to put some cattle to graze there. When they discovered minerals on her land, he started moving in mining equipment, and she told him to get off, and he was very angry. And so twice he tried to burn her and her family out.
Sometimes we got favorable results, but oftentimes that was not the case.
At that time, I had an uncle, and his guardian was the dentist there, and the dentist told me he had paid him that day his check, his money, his royalties, paid my uncle, so he knew he had a lot of money. Well, the next morning they found him dead on the railroad tracks in Speary, Oklahoma. He said, I know he had money, but he didn't the next morning, and they found that he'd been in a card game, but they didn't pursue it or check it out.
Finally, the federal government had to step in and try to introduce some leveling measures, and then for the government to put into place controls which would protect the Quapaws from the outside influences, to basically keep them from entering into poor arrangements for mining of their land.
Back in 1974, this letter was received, and this is in to inform all Indian landowners that if a satisfactory lease cannot be secured between the leaseors and the leasee within 90 days from the receipt of this notice, it shall be the intent of this office to advertise the leased Indian lands to the highest bidder at a sealed bid lease sale in accordance with regulations set forth by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. This one of the owners didn't agree. He said, please be advised I cannot sign the lease agreement because I feel it's not beneficial to myself or other owners for the reasons listed. So if they didn't agree to go ahead and lease it, the Bureau of Indian Affairs was going to lease it anyway. Did they really have control? No, because they were deemed incompetent. Were they acting on behalf of the Native American, on behalf of the landowner? Doesn't sound like it.
Seems like they kind of stopped passing things today. I guess might be what you call civilization or what.
A new report looks into the lost history at Native American boarding schools across the country. For decades following the Civil War, thousands of Native American children and teens were forced to attend these schools. They were intentionally separated from their families and their culture.
When I was 13 years old, I went to the law. And they sent me to school down here at the Catholic school when I was 5.
Let's see, I went there, was like at the 5th, 6th grade.
at Seneca. So it was just a natural thing for the older kids to go and look out for the littler ones. Because see, they had kids that weren't even in first grade yet. Some of them were still in diapers that they brought. They were just taking kids away in the families.
She told me that she had gone to the St. Mary's Catholic mission here as a child, and that was the first time she ever saw a bed.
My grandmother was actually put into an orphanage, into a boarding school in Pennsylvania, the Carlisle boarding school.
He went through boarding schools.
When his mother died, he was basically orphaned and not raised traditionally.
And that's where she learned how to speak English and to read and write and all the basic things.
They were turned over to lawyers, and lawyers handled all their business. The lawyers became rich.
She went through a lot in her life. She was abused in that place.
He'd went through some things and always shared the past with me. He'd struggled with alcoholism until about 1956.
He wasn't allowed to speak his language.
Grandma never, after she came out of that place, she never talked about it after that.
Fear. Fear of getting beaten in schools. Fear of losing their traditional way of life.
They helped this little girl. And she wasn't a little girl. I was in the 5th grade, and this girl was 17 years old. And she was in the 4th grade. She was speaking her language to her brother outside. And she had to eat soap.
There would be a few times that I would catch him singing songs just when he didn't know I was around, and that made me proud, but it also hurt to know that he didn't feel like he could do that in front of people.
It was awful. I remember seeing because her mouth was swollen and was cracking and everything.
Because of their challenges that they faced and the sacrifices that they made, we're still here.
She never taught my mom how to speak the Quapaw language, and I think it was because she was afraid for her.
Read the stories that are from that time, from my Grandpa Victor and Grandma Slagle and Grandma Supernaw and all of those folks. They talk about Quapaws don't exist anymore. We're not going to be here anymore.
I know for my family line, which is disheartening for me, is one of my great-grandparents said, you need to live like they do.
They were trying with the same way with the others do.
Well, it didn't completely eradicate it, but it did a real good job of assimilating almost all of it out of our people through the schools, through relocation.
My dad went to Chilocco Indian School.
My mother, I think, attended maybe 6th or 7th grade, and I don't think my dad went that far in school.
And they were sent to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, Indian school up there. And they had to cut their hair. They couldn't speak Quapaw anymore.
So it was rough on them.
You have to realize that Grandma was in that generation where being a pure blood or a full blood Indian was not really good for that person.
So it makes sense that we're going away. We're not going to be here anymore. And so their mindset was, well, we're not going to be here.
My mother got out of a cafe because he said that they didn't serve blacks. I remember I was shocked. My dad had his moccasins on. My mother's hair was long and straight. I was just shocked as a little kid having my mother talk that way.
It was dramatic for him.
We'd have to go into the back doors of restaurants, and some people, they wouldn't even serve you.
Because we weren't allowed to have our traditions, we weren't allowed to sing, we weren't allowed to speak our language.
Caught her and her sister talking one day, and they were trying to remember different Quapaw words, and they couldn't come up with them.
We were at Keller's Barbecue restaurant in Joplin, Missouri, before we got married. I realized then that I was totally different. They would wait on everybody except me.
We all went to Indiana to watch my nephew play football, and we stopped in a restaurant, and there were 10 of us, and we were all Indian. And we sat there and sat there and sat there and sat there, and they didn't wait on us, but we were having a good time talking. Then we realized, when we looked around, they were waiting on everybody but us. And they refused to serve us, so we left.
Me and the girls would go down to one of the stores, and they would say, we have to go through the back door. I'm sorry, but I grew up with blacks, whites, reds, yellows, you name it. I lived on an Air Force base. We never went through people's back door and stuff. And so I walked through the front door, and the store owner says, you're supposed to go through the back door. And I said, I'm sorry. I says, I don't go through anybody's back door. And he knew I wasn't from there. Those girls got to start going through the front door of that store. It still affects us. Some of the people are stronger for it. Others, not so.
I always thought the way that they treat men, I mean, it's just not right, and it's not unfair, and it's, but that's the way it was.
The reality of being forced to go far away from home, away from everything that you knew, had to have been a horrible tragedy.
Sonny mentioned about being upset whenever people were saying you're an Indian, and he wasn't an Indian. He didn't want to be an Indian. I remember saying the exact same thing, playing cowboys and Indians with the kids over in England, and I told him, I says, I want to be the cowboy. I'm not the Indian.
Now, Dad, he worked in Montana when 1960, and I went up there, and they would have signs out front, no service to Indians. You know, and even in Clinton, Oklahoma, when he worked there at 59, 58, they would have signs, no service to Indians. And then my cousin, Peggy, who's almost full-blood, she went out there and tried to get a job, and they just told her, we don't hire Indians.
But I didn't know that. My folks did not tell me that, which I think is great, because they shielded me from what prejudice there was.
We have a website, and that's on the website. Grandma telling it in her own words. She said to us, and we have her on tape, Jenny, white people don't like me. And she said, but that's okay, because I don't like them either.
I came into contact with racism at a young age.
I hated going to bus stations, restaurants. I just want to cry.
The town I grew up in was all Catholic and all white. We'd get these little comments and things along the way, and I would go home, and my mom never, ever showed that bothered her. And one day, I came home from school, and somebody had said something to me, it made me cry or whatever. And she said, Martha, everybody wants to be you because you're special and they're not. And you have special things about you that they don't have about them.
They call him Powwow nowadays. In his day, it was known as the Devil's Promenade Picnic, and people came from miles around.
Unforgettable review of Aboriginal splendor, reliving the ancient glories of their proud race. At the ceremonial grounds, red man competes against red man.
Indate, Wakanda, Wakanda Ijinke, Hompada, Dadi, Ganeke. Father God and the Son of God, for this day, thank you.
Originally, the powwow was not to draw attention to yourself. You were just part of a nucleus that made up the tribe. Everybody was just part of the whole.
All of the songs that they have, they have meanings to them. There's some songs that, even make me want to weep.
It's not about how you dance, it's about how you feel.
A feeling like a spirit that you get, and they have what they call wanake. When they say wanake, you feel good, and you're part of it, and it doesn't happen all the time. But when it happens, you know it.
The singing, the sounds.
The drum, seems like the drum beat gets right here in your heart and in the core of your body.
The heartbeat of a baby, it's life. You're given life because when you're carrying a baby, you can feel, and it sounds like a drum. It just fills your heart.
The feeling of the whole thing, it is the heart of the powwow, and that connects everything. It's my family.
This is a family, and now I have grandkids, and I think it is incredibly important for them to know where their family comes from.
It's our heritage, and it's been going on for over 150 years, and that's the Quapaws.
I am very proud of our culture. Quapaw Nation is a sovereign nation, and I know that we are fighting today, even our state of Oklahoma, that want to challenge our sovereignty. It is part of me. I'm part of it.
It's really to keep our traditions alive. A lot of natives got their hair chopped off, they had to go to residential schools, they didn't get to practice their culture. It just feels really good that we get to do what some of our ancestors didn't get to do.
This powwow is something that really keeps our culture alive, and a lot of us have fought to keep the land safe, not just the reservations, but keep the culture alive.
I'm a grandmother now. I need to teach my children what they need to know.
It's important for me to come here and learn more about it myself so that I can teach them.
It's our job to be able to teach our children.
Unless you've been here and have seen it and felt all the energy that goes with it, I really can't describe it. I have no words for it. It's just the environment, the smell.
The colors, the regalia.
It's a celebration of culture.
Whenever you get down into that arena, you will see the beauty of what we do every day.
It's everything from tiny toddlers to my mom, who is turning 90 this year.
You're going to see elders out there dancing. You're going to see elders on the side wanting to dance. They're up out of their seats to the music, dancing.
There's a song, and a lot of songs have words, and a lot of songs have stories. But there's a song they have. It was like an old man was at the powwow, and he's looking out. And he said, "Where are all those old men?" Where are all those old men that used to be here? Where are they? And then it occurred to him, well, they're here. It's those people. They'll be the old men. It's an old man looking and seeing that they'll be the old men, and it'll go on.
I began dancing when they dressed me, whether I wanted to dance or not. If they dressed me, I was going to be in them.
I've only missed 2 in my life. That's once when I was in Germany and once when I was in Vietnam during service. But I've always attended powwows.
The ladies laughing and visiting and standing in line and the pots and pans clanking and the kids running around and everything while they were waiting on their rations.
I can remember the only light we had was off the fire that was in the center of the dance grounds.
When I was little, you can hear when somebody started laughing, it would just rumble through the grounds and everybody started laughing.
And then they had foot races, and I remember my mother raced.
There's merry-go-rounds, Ferris wheels, archery shot.
As a matter of fact, for some powwows, we would never even make it to the dance arena. We would just all stay in our own camps and visit and talk with each other.
And that's your way of life, that's your culture.
Been singing around that drum since I was 15.
Be respectful in the arena.
I remember Alec Beaver had a big, long cook shack. When I was a kid and visitors would come and you'd see them down at the arena just kind of hanging out, you'd go and you invite them to come and eat.
Different people would invite people to their camps to eat.
I can always remember the smell of smoke, the wood fires.
Every camp had their own cook stove or grill that they cooked on, open fire.
The smell of a fire, that's the first thing we would start at the beginning of the powwow.
Coming into camp and there's a fire going and Eco's cooking or Mom's cooking or their little mama is cooking.
I can remember smelling like a funnel cake.
Some of the housewives would cook on an open fire.
The smell of the cooking from the different camps.
You could always tell when powwow's on because you come around this corner here, you get right up here by this church and you could start smelling the fires, and everything, the food, and that was just the aroma all around through here.
It was just a hospitable environment.
Back then, you were asked, somebody would ask you to come sit and sing.
They lasted 3 or 4 days. He rented tents to these people and had them in a big pile. And when the people came into camp, they'd tell them to go over and pick them out of camp.
As soon as I start to hear locusts in the summertime, I get excited because I know powwow's right around the corner. I love the sounds of powwow. You hear the people walking by. This camp is my home. It's my heart.
This campsite was established by my grandmother, Fanny Good-Eagle Richards. She was full-blooded Quapaw. She spoke the language fluently. Her son, my dad, built this camp, and we have been here ever since.
I was named after Grandma Frances Fanny Good-Eagle. You can ask any of the camps around here, everybody talks lovingly about Grandma Fanny. She loved everybody, she fed everybody. Everybody was welcome in the camp and made to feel a part, and that's what I want to pass on. The Indian way. You feed people, and it shows that you care.
The meal is sacred. We have to bless anyone that's there for the dinner. It's a very important ritual.
Tonight, before the traditional dinner, he is going to teach our nephew the proper way to bless the camp with an eagle feather and smoke and cedar. We bless the food, the cooks, and the entire family to know we're one. A family united.
Pray now, Father, for the cooks that prepared this food for us, that you would give a special blessing to them. These things we ask in thy name. Amen. Dee and I, right now, we are co-owners of the camp. When I'm gone, then she will be the sole owner.
I hope to be the next generation to represent the Good Eagle name, and for my kids and grandkids, for them to remember me this way in our camp, that they remember, oh, Grandma Frances, Grandma Dee welcomed us in and loved everybody, wanted everybody to be accepted and treated like family. Every time I'm with Uncle, I think of new things to ask because you never know. We never know, when our last powwow together will be, any of us. And it's just a blessing to have every one of them here. And we just have to really take advantage of the time that we have with them.
I think my grandmother would be looking down upon us with a great smile on her face and thinking our mission was complete.
We camped over there. When I went into service, those tents that we camped in felt just like the ones in service. So when I'd go in that tent in the service, I could smell powwow.
My dad would rent this huge tent.
A huge tent. It probably wasn't that big, but to me it was.
It was kind of like a mini circus tent.
Everybody was welcome.
When they used to dance over at Tall Chief's land, my father had a drum and people would come to the house and they'd, sing these songs and stuff and practice, and just to not only practice, but just to be doing that.
Remembered sitting up here on top of the hill and watching them dance.
And I was sitting with Nancy and she just sat there and watched me watching, and she said, "I can see you want to dance." And she ran and found me a shawl, put it over my shoulders, and took me out there.
Dancing or talking with family members or my friends.
My papa was the one who I traveled to powwows with, and he always took me to Ogahpah powwow if my mom had to work or anything. So he was like, I always hung on to him.
It's just being really close to family. It's like a celebration.
Watching my aunts and helping my aunts and my grandmother.
I've always grown up in the arena, being brought in the Ogahpah way. At the age of 5,
the powwow is a part of it. It's kind of like a family reunion every 4th of July, a celebration of the Ogahpah people.
It's a gathering of family.
The gathering of your family members.
Camping down here was always a joy when you were a kid.
It was always a gathering, a way to bring everybody together.
It's basically a reunion of all of our tribal people.
That's what I think the Ogahpah people were well known by, is by their loving and giving and kind ways.
Entate wakanda watong we ha yo ho we ha yo ho we ha yo
People get lost up into production, and it's not production, it's spiritual.
You're joining and you're celebrating with not just with everybody that's there physically, but all of the ancestors that are coming in to dance with you.
One of those things when that spirit gets to moving down there in that drum and those people are dancing and everybody's singing, it just gives you kind of a feeling you can't describe.
It's a healing in your soul. Just like I got sick a couple of years ago, and it took me down. You know, I used to be pretty heavy and lively.
My mom died about 6 years ago, and it took me a long time to find home.
If I have any distractions, if I have any kind of anxiety going on with me, I can hear that drum.
When you hear that drum, you know, you can be having the worst day.
It's the heartbeat of the powwow.
You start out and it's the drum that stays with you in your heart.
The drum, that's our heartbeat.
Everything about the drum is special. It's kind of like the heartbeat of who we are.
Because that connects you all the way back to the beginning.
It's like sitting in a heartbeat.
We don't know how to live any other way. It's all we grew up with.
Celebrate and share things, and stepping out in that arena, there is a spirituality to it.
I can hear that good beat, and it's like the Creator is using that as a force to calm me down.
And you carry yourself in that manner. Go in certain ways around the drum.
About 4 years after she was gone, we dressed all the kids, and they were all starting to walk down that hill. And so I'm picking up the last little bit of stuff to put it away, and I turn and I look, and I see my grandchildren and my children walking down that hill. And then immediately I was home again.
When I get out here, I could stand. Maybe I have to hold on to something, but it's just a feeling that it's hard to describe. It's just like you've been away for so long, and you've been lonely, and you missed your family, and you're there. When you finally get there and you get that feeling, I'm home. I'm home.
Det var Hegelman. Ziemliche. Das sagt er eben. Hegelman. Was er kann. Hegelman was ziemlich. That means they knew in the heavens and with stars.